For 3 years, Daniel Mitchell and his service dog Atlas had survived on the margins of Oakmont, sleeping in shelters when they could, under bridges when they couldn't. Nobody looked at them twice anymore. But when a desperate woman stumbled into the train station one November evening, confused and alone, Daniel did what he'd always done. He helped. What he didn't know was that this single act of kindness would unlock a future neither of them could have imagined. This is the story of how compassion in the darkness can light the way home. The cold settled into Oakmont Station like it owned the place. November had turned mean early that year, and the old building's heating system wheezed, but did little to push back the chill that crept through cracked windows and under warped doors. Daniel Mitchell sat on the far bench with Atlas pressed against his leg, sharing what little warmth they both had left. $37. That's what remained in his pocket after scraping together bus fare they'd used 2 days ago to get to this town. $37 that needed to last until, well, he didn't know until when. The shelter downtown had a 3-night maximum stay, and they'd use those nights. Tomorrow morning, he and Atlas would be back to finding doorways and loading docks anywhere that blocked the wind. Atlas shifted beside him, the German shepherd's brown eyes tracking movement across the station. The dog wasn't as lean as when they'd first been paired 4 years ago at the VA therapy program. The streets had carved them both down to essentials, but Atlas still worked, still pressed against Daniel's leg when anxiety crawled up his spine, still woke him from the nightmares that came whether he slept on a cot or concrete. "We'll figure it out, boy," Daniel murmured, his hand finding the familiar spot behind Atlas's ear. The evening commute had thinned to nothing. Just them and the night janitor who pretended not to see them as long as they stayed quiet. Daniel had learned the art of being invisible in these spaces, public enough to be safe, unobtrusive enough not to get thrown out into weather that could kill you if you weren't careful. He counted the money again. $37. If he bought the cheapest food he could find, maybe stretched it over 4 days, kept Atlas fed first. The station doors burst open with a crack that made Daniel's hand fly to Atlas's collar instinctively. Years in the military had carved reflexes into his bones that civilian life couldn't erase. A woman stumbled through the entrance, her gray hair wild around her face, her coat unbuttoned despite the cold. She wore slippers, pink fuzzy slippers, and her eyes held that vacant look Daniel had seen before in soldiers who'd been hit too hard, whose minds had gone somewhere their bodies couldn't follow. "Thomas," she called out, her voice thin and desperate. "Thomas, where are you?" The janitor glanced up, then away, pushing his cart toward the far end of the station. Daniel watched as the woman wandered to the ticket window, already dark for the night, her hands patting the glass like she could make it open through sheer need. "Miss, the ticket office is closed," she said to her own reflection. "When does the next train arrive?" Something in Daniel's chest tightened. Atlas whined softly, sensing the shift in his breathing. The woman turned in a slow circle, her slippers scraping on the old tile. "I need to get home. I need to find Thomas. He'll be worried sick." Daniel knew that look. He'd seen it in his own mother's eyes the last year before she passed, when the world became a strange country and familiar faces turned to strangers. Dementia, the doctors had called it. A slow erosion of everything that made a person themselves. The woman was shivering now, her coat hanging open to reveal a thin nightgown underneath. No purse, no phone, nothing but confusion and cold. $37. Daniel stood up, his knees creaking in protest. Atlas rose with him, the dog's body a solid warmth against his left leg. "Ma'am?" Daniel approached slowly, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you lost?" She focused on him with effort, her eyes swimming with tears. "I need to find Thomas. Do you know where Thomas is?" "Let's get you warm first," Daniel said. He shrugged out of his jacket, the heavy one he'd gotten from the church donation box, the one that had been keeping him alive, and draped it around her shoulders. "There you go." "Oh, thank you," she said, and for a moment clarity flickered across her face. "You're very kind." Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, the cracked screen barely functional, but it still worked for emergencies. He dialed 911. "Yes, I'm at Oakmont Station. There's an elderly woman here who appears to be lost and confused. She's not dressed for the weather and seems disoriented." While he talked to the dispatcher, he guided the woman to his bench. Atlas immediately pressed close to her, offering his warmth. She put her hand on the dog's head, and something in her face softened. "What a good dog," she whispered. "They said police and an ambulance are about 10 minutes out," Daniel told her, sitting on her other side, trying not to think about how the cold was already finding its way through his thin flannel shirt. "You're going to be okay. They'll help you find Thomas." She nodded, leaning against Atlas like the dog was a pillow. "I got confused. I was looking for him." "I know," Daniel said softly. "But you're safe now." When the ambulance arrived, followed by a police cruiser, Daniel spoke with the paramedics while they gently assessed the woman. She was hypothermic, they said. Another hour out in this weather and she might not have made it. Officer Martinez took Daniel's statement, his eyes taking in the worn clothes, the too-thin frame, the service dog with the faded vest. "You probably saved her life, getting her inside and calling us," the officer said. Daniel shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "Actually," the officer said, glancing at the janitor who'd ignored everything, "most people don't." As they loaded the woman into the ambulance, she reached for Daniel's hand. "Thank you," she said, clear-eyed for just a moment. "You're an angel." He watched the ambulance pull away, lights flashing red and blue into the darkness. Then he turned back to the empty station, his body already shaking from cold without his jacket. $37, no jacket, and the temperature dropping toward 20 degrees. Atlas pressed against his leg, and Daniel sat back down on the bench trying to conserve heat. He'd made the right choice. He knew he'd made the right choice. But that didn't change the fact that tonight was going to be very, very long. By midnight, Daniel couldn't feel his fingers. He'd walked 12 blocks trying to find somewhere, anywhere, he and Atlas could get out of the wind. Every doorway either had someone already in it or had been blocked by the building owners. The library, where they sometimes spent days, had closed hours ago. The church shelter was locked down for the night. His teeth chattered so hard he bit his tongue, tasting blood. Atlas whined, pressing closer, trying to share warmth neither of them really had. The dog's service vest helped a little, but it wasn't meant for this kind of cold. Nothing Daniel owned was meant for this. They finally found a loading dock behind a grocery store, concrete walls on 3 sides creating a pocket that blocked the worst of the wind. Daniel pulled out the thin emergency blanket he'd been carrying in his pack, metallic silver, better than nothing, and wrapped it around both of them. The night stretched like a wound. Daniel drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep, his body fighting to stay warm enough to survive. He pulled Atlas closer, burying his face in the dog's fur, remembering nights in Afghanistan where cold had also been the enemy, where you learned to share body heat or die. His mind wandered. Maybe he'd made a mistake. Maybe he should have just called 911 and let someone else deal with it. Maybe he should have kept his jacket, found a different way. No. He pushed the thought away. That woman had needed help. Sometimes you did the right thing even when it cost you everything. Atlas licked his face, the dog's warm breath like a small furnace against his frozen skin. "Good boy," Daniel whispered. "We're okay. We're going to be okay." He'd said the same thing to soldiers under his command once, when things got bad, when it looked like they might not make it through. Sometimes saying it made it true. When gray light finally leaked into the eastern sky, Daniel could barely stand. His legs had gone numb from the cold, his hands swollen and aching. Atlas struggled up beside him, the dog moving stiffly, their shared night having taken its toll on both of them. They walked. It was all Daniel knew to do. Keep moving, keep warm, stay alive until the next thing. At a gas station, he spent $12 on coffee for himself and food for Atlas. The dog needed to eat. That wasn't negotiable. He broke off pieces of his own gas station sandwich and slipped them to Atlas between customers, making sure no one saw, making sure they didn't get thrown out. In the bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror. His face had aged 10 years in a night. The cold had turned his lips blue, his skin gray. His hands shook when he tried to splash water on his face. $25 left. The day crawled by. They found the public library when it opened at 10, stayed until 5 when it closed. The warmth brought Daniel back to life slowly, painfully, his body protesting every moment of the thaw. He dozed in a chair with a book open on his lap, Atlas curled at his feet, both of them pretending they were just regular patrons, taking advantage of the quiet. But evening came too fast, and with it, another night. This time, Daniel knew what to expect. He found the loading dock again, wrapped himself in Atlas in the emergency blanket again, and prepared to survive again. He thought about the woman from the station, wondered if she'd found Thomas, wondered if she was warm and safe and surrounded by people who loved her. That helped somehow. Knowing his cold had bought her warmth, his discomfort had purchased her safety. Atlas shifted against him and Daniel wrapped his arms around the dog. "I'd do it again," he whispered into the darkness. "I'd do it 1,000 times." The cold didn't care about his conviction. It pressed down anyway, relentless and indifferent. By the third night, Daniel had spent another $8 on food, 17 left. His body was starting to shut down in small ways, a persistent cough that wouldn't leave, joints that screamed when he moved, a fog in his brain that made thinking hard, but he was alive. And Atlas was alive, and that woman, whoever she was alive too. Sometimes that had to be enough. On the fourth morning, Daniel used his last $17 to buy food for Atlas and coffee for himself at a different gas station. The dog ate while Daniel tried to warm his hands around the paper cup, steam rising into air that still cut like knives. He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know how they'd survive another week, let alone another winter. But he knew who he was, and that woman at the station had reminded him, sometimes being who you are costs everything you have. The sun came up over Oakmont, cold and bright, illuminating a city that had mostly stopped seeing him years ago. Daniel stood, Atlas at his side, and started walking. If nothing else, they could always keep moving. Eleanor Whitmore woke in a hospital room she didn't recognize, surrounded by machines that beeped softly in the darkness. Her daughter Victoria sat in a chair beside the bed, head bowed, hands clutched together like she was praying. "Victoria?" Eleanor's voice came out rough, uncertain. Her daughter's head snapped up, tears already streaming down her face. "Mom. Oh, Mom, thank God." Within minutes, the room filled with doctors, nurses, Victoria's husband Robert, Eleanor's son Christopher driving up from Portland. Everyone talking at once, checking monitors, asking questions Eleanor couldn't quite follow. She was safe. That was what they kept saying. She was safe now. But the edges of her memory were soft, like a painting left out in rain. She remembered being cold. She remembered pink slippers and being very confused. She remembered a man with kind eyes and a dog that was warm and solid and real. "The police found you at Oakmont Station," Victoria explained later when they were alone again. "You'd wandered out of Cedarwood Care Facility. You'd been missing for 6 hours." Eleanor touched her daughter's hand. "There was a man, the police told us, a homeless veteran called 911. He gave you his jacket, stayed with you until the ambulance came. They said," Victoria's voice broke, "they said another hour in that cold and you might not have made it." Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to pull the memory into focus. A man with a thin face and sad eyes, a dog with warm fur, kindness in a place where she'd been so lost. "I want to thank him," she said. Victoria nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'm going to find him, Mom, I promise." But finding a homeless man in a city the size of Oakmont turned out to be harder than Victoria had expected. The police had taken Daniel's statement but had no follow-up information. The station had no security cameras that captured clear images. The officer remembered a service dog, a veteran, a thin man who'd seemed more worried about the woman than himself. Victoria hired a private investigator. She posted on social media, describing the veteran and his dog who'd saved her mother's life. She offered a reward for information. Nothing came back but dead ends. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor recovered physically, but the incident had accelerated something the doctors had been warning about. Her dementia was progressing faster than they'd hoped. She needed full-time care now, which Victoria arranged immediately. But Eleanor kept asking about the man with the dog, kept saying she needed to thank him properly. "I was so cold," she'd tell Victoria during visits, "and he gave me his coat, his only coat. He had nothing, and he gave me everything." Victoria redoubled her efforts. She went to homeless shelters, showed photos she'd commissioned an artist to create based on the police description. She talked to outreach workers, volunteers at soup kitchens, anyone who worked with Oakmont's homeless population. A woman at St. Mary's shelter thought she knew who Victoria was describing. Guy with a German Shepherd service dog? Yeah, I've seen him. Daniel something. But he hasn't been around lately. Last I heard, he was sleeping rough near the warehouse district. Victoria drove to the warehouse district that same day. She walked through loading docks and alleys, called out, searched. Robert went with her the next day. Then Christopher. Nothing. It was like Daniel Mitchell and his dog Atlas had vanished. Maybe he left town, Robert suggested gently. Maybe he moved on. But Victoria couldn't let it go. This man had saved her mother, had given what little he had without hesitation, without thinking about what it might cost him. She increased the reward. $10,000 for information leading to finding the veteran who'd helped Eleanor Whitmore at Oakmont Station. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the incident at the station. Mrs. Harrison? This is Linda Peterson. I work at Mercy Hospital. I think I might have information about the man you're looking for. Victoria's heart hammered. You found him? He came into our ER 2 days ago, pneumonia. He'd been sleeping outside, got too sick to keep going. His service dog wouldn't let the ambulance crew leave without him, so they brought them both in. Is he okay? A pause. He's stable now. But ma'am, he was in bad shape. If his dog hadn't made such a fuss, he might not have gotten help in time. Victoria was already grabbing her coat. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The loading dock behind Miller's warehouse became home for 2 more weeks. Daniel learned which delivery drivers would look the other way when they found him there in the mornings, which ones would kick him out before they'd even put their trucks in park. The cough that started the 4th night never left. It settled into his chest like a squatter, refusing eviction no matter what Daniel did. Over-the-counter medicine from the dollar store helped for a few hours, then the coughing would start again, deep and wet and exhausting. Atlas watched him with worried eyes. I'm fine, boy, Daniel lied, and the dog's ears went back like he knew it. Without his heavy jacket, Daniel couldn't stay warm enough. His body burned through calories trying to maintain temperature, but he barely had money for food anymore. He'd found day labor twice, unloading a truck, cleaning out a storage unit, which put $20 in his pocket each time. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He started losing track of time. Days blurred together in a fog of cold and hunger and exhaustion. He'd walk to the library, doze in a chair until they made him leave. He'd nurse a single coffee at the gas station for hours. He'd find Atlas food however he could, a dented can from behind the grocery store, leftovers someone had thrown out. The dog stayed lean, but ate. Daniel made sure of that. On a Tuesday, or maybe it was Wednesday, Daniel found himself outside a diner at closing time. The cook, a man named Joe Martinez who'd seen Daniel around, came out with a to-go container. Here, Joe said, shoving it into Daniel's hands, was going to toss it anyway. The container held a burger and fries, still warm. Daniel's eyes burned with tears he refused to shed. Thank you, he managed. Joe nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. There's more tomorrow if you're around. Don't make me regret this. It became a routine. Daniel would show up at closing and Joe would have something. Never made a big deal about it. Never made Daniel feel small for needing it. Small kindnesses. They added up to survival. But the cough got worse. Daniel started seeing colors in what he coughed up. Yellow, then green, then flecks of red that scared him more than he wanted to admit. I need to rest, he told Atlas one evening, sitting on their loading dock, his body shaking despite the emergency blanket. Just need to rest. The dog pressed close, whining. That night, Daniel's fever spiked. He dreamed he was back in Afghanistan, the desert sun burning him alive, his squad calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach. He woke shivering so hard he thought his bones might break, Atlas licking his face frantically. Okay, Daniel whispered. Okay, boy. I'm here. But he wasn't really. His body was there, but his mind kept slipping away, finding places that weren't loading docks or cold November nights. The next day, he couldn't stand without holding onto the wall. Couldn't walk more than a block without stopping to catch his breath. Atlas stayed pressed against his leg, the dog's body bearing some of his weight, helping him stay upright. They made it to the gas station. Daniel bought a bottle of water with change he'd found in a parking lot, sipped it slowly while sitting against the outside wall. A woman came out, took one look at him, and dialed her phone. "I'm fine," Daniel tried to say, but she wasn't listening. The ambulance came with lights and sirens. Daniel tried to refuse, tried to explain he couldn't afford it, but the world was going sideways and someone was saying, "Pneumonia and critical, and we need to move now." Atlas barked, sharp, loud, refusing to be left behind. "He's a service dog," Daniel managed. "Has to stay with me." The paramedics looked at each other. Rules said no, but the dog was making it clear he wasn't accepting that answer. "Fine," one of them said, "but he stays calm or he's out." Atlas jumped into the ambulance, pressed himself against Daniel's side, and didn't make another sound. The hospital was bright and warm and smelled like disinfectant. Daniel drifted in and out while they did things to him: IVs, oxygen, X-rays. Atlas stayed by the bed, a solid presence when everything else turned liquid and uncertain. Pneumonia, both lungs. Severely dehydrated, malnourished, the words floated past like debris in a flood. They admitted him, put him in a room with white walls and beeping machines, let Atlas stay because Daniel's breathing got worse when they tried to separate them. For the first time in 6 weeks, Daniel slept in a warm bed. He dreamed of train stations and women with kind eyes. He dreamed of jackets he'd given away and cold that had tried to kill him. When he woke, groggy from medication, a nurse was checking his IV. "How long have I been here?" Daniel asked. 2 days, she said. "You were pretty out of it when they brought you in." 2 days. 2 days of warm. 2 days of food. 2 days where Atlas could rest without watching for danger. "Thank you," Daniel said. The nurse smiled. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a ways to go before you're discharged." Victoria Harrison found Daniel on the 3rd day of his hospital stay. She knocked softly on the doorframe, and he looked up from where he'd been watching Atlas sleep in the corner. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked. Daniel nodded, uncertain. The woman was in her 50s, well-dressed, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about where she'd sleep or if she'd eat. "I'm Victoria Harrison," she said. "I think you helped my mother 6 weeks ago, at Oakmont Station." The memory surfaced slowly. The confused woman, pink slippers, the jacket he'd given away. "Is she okay?" Daniel asked. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Because of you, yes, she's okay." She sat in the visitor's chair and the story came out. Her mother, Eleanor, the dementia. The 6 hours of searching before police found her at the station, hypothermic and disoriented. "The doctor said another hour in that cold and she wouldn't have made it," Victoria said. "You saved her life." Daniel shook his head. "I just called 911. Anyone would have—" "No," Victoria interrupted firmly. "Not anyone. You gave her your jacket, your only jacket. You stayed with her, kept her warm, kept her calm. The paramedics said that mattered. That made the difference." She pulled out her phone, showed him photos. Eleanor in the hospital, then at a care facility, smiling but with that distant look in her eyes that Daniel recognized. "She keeps asking about you," Victoria said. "About the man with the kind eyes and the good dog. She wants to thank you." Daniel looked at Atlas, still sleeping. "I'm glad she's okay. That's all that matters." "Mr. Mitchell," Victoria said carefully, "the nurse told me why you're here. They said you've been homeless, that you've been sick for weeks." Daniel felt his face heat with shame. "I'm going to be fine. As soon as I'm discharged, I'll figure something out." "I'd like to help with that," Victoria said, "if you'll let me." He looked at her. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity." Victoria leaned forward. "You saved my mother's life. You gave what you had without hesitation, without thinking about the cost to yourself. I've spent 6 weeks looking for you. My family wants to do something for you. Please." "I don't know," Daniel said. Victoria pulled out a business card, wrote something on the back. "My mother has a guest house on her property. It's sitting empty. You and Atlas could stay there just until you get back on your feet. No strings, no rent, just a warm place to sleep and time to heal. Daniel stared at the card. I can't. My mother is Eleanor Whitmore, Victoria said. Maybe you've heard the name. He hadn't, but the way she said it suggested he should have. Victoria smiled slightly. She's the founder of Whitmore Medical Technologies. She built the company over 40 years, revolutionized emergency medical devices. She retired 5 years ago and has been doing nothing but charity work since. When she heard I found you, she insisted. She said anyone who'd give his last coat to a stranger is someone worth helping. Whitmore Medical, Daniel repeated. The name meant something, even to him. Big, successful, the kind of company that made headlines. The guest house is yours for as long as you need it, Victoria said. And if you're open to it, there's a position at our foundation. We work with veterans, helping them transition back to civilian life. Your experience would be valuable, but that's optional. First, you need to heal. You need to be warm and fed and safe. Will you let us do that? Daniel looked at Atlas, then back at Victoria. Every instinct said no. Said he couldn't accept this, said he didn't deserve it. But he was so tired and so cold. And the thought of having a place where Atlas could be safe. I don't know what to say, Daniel admitted. Say yes, Victoria said gently. Let this kindness come back to you. You earned it 6 weeks ago when you chose to help instead of walking away. Daniel's throat closed up. He couldn't speak, could only nod. Victoria smiled, tears on her cheeks. Good. Then let's get you well first. Then we'll figure out the rest. The next 3 days passed in a blur of antibiotics and physical therapy and quiet conversations with Victoria. She visited every afternoon, bringing updates about her mother, making plans Daniel could barely believe were real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will be a fever dream, Daniel told her on day 6. Victoria laughed. It's real, and you deserve it. On day 7, the doctors cleared him for discharge. Daniel walked out of Mercy Hospital with Atlas at his side, his lungs still healing but functional, his body still thin but fed. Victoria waited in the parking lot with a car he recognized as expensive, even if he couldn't name the brand. Ready? She asked. I should probably... Daniel stopped. I don't have anything to pack. I left everything at the loading dock. We'll get you what you need, Victoria said. Don't worry about that. The drive took 40 minutes, heading out of the city into suburbs that turned into proper estates. Victoria's mother's property sat behind stone walls, acres of grounds visible even in the gray December afternoon. The guest house was larger than any place Daniel had lived in years. 1 bedroom, a full kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, clean and warm and more than he knew what to do with. This is too much, Daniel said, standing in the middle of the living room, Atlas exploring the space with cautious sniffs. It's not enough, Victoria countered, but it's a start. She'd stocked the refrigerator, put dog food in bowls in the kitchen, left fresh sheets on the bed and towels in the bathroom. Everything he'd need to just live, without fighting, without scraping by. Daniel felt tears press behind his eyes and forced them back. I don't know how to thank you, he said. Victoria put her hand on his arm. You already did, that night at the station. You already thanked all of us by being who you are. After she left, Daniel stood in the middle of the guest house, Atlas pressed against his leg, both of them trying to believe this was real. He called the only person he had left, his sister Sarah in Montana, who he hadn't talked to in 2 years because shame had made him stop answering her calls. Daniel? Sarah's voice cracked. Oh my God, Daniel, where have you been? He told her, all of it. The homelessness, the train station, the woman, the hospital, this impossible kindness that had landed him somewhere safe. Sarah cried. So did Daniel. They talked for 2 hours, rebuilding bridges he'd thought were burned forever. That night, Daniel slept in a real bed, with Atlas curled on a dog bed beside him. He woke 3 times, disoriented, sure he'd find himself on concrete or in a shelter cot. But each time the room was still there, warm and quiet and real. In the morning, Victoria arrived with her mother. Eleanor Whitmore was in her 70s. her white hair perfectly styled, her eyes bright despite the confusion Daniel could see lurking at their edges. She studied him carefully, her face working through memory like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "You gave me your coat," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel confirmed. Eleanor smiled. "I remember. You have kind eyes and a very good dog." Atlas's tail thumped at the praise. They sat together in the guest house, Eleanor and Victoria and Daniel, drinking coffee and talking about nothing important. Eleanor drifted sometimes, her attention caught by memories Daniel couldn't see, but she kept coming back to him, to Atlas, to this moment. "Victoria tells me you won't take a job at the foundation," Eleanor said during a moment of clarity. "I'm not qualified," Daniel protested. "I don't have a degree. I've been out of work for years." "You saved my life," Eleanor interrupted. "That's the only qualification that matters to me. The foundation helps veterans transition back to civilian life. You've lived what they're going through. You understand it. That's worth more than any degree." Daniel looked at Victoria, who nodded. "She's right, and it's not charity. You'd be doing real work, making a real difference, but only if you want to." He thought about the loading dock, the cold nights, the feeling of being invisible, forgotten, beyond help. "I want to," he said quietly. "I want to help." Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand. Then it settled. Over the next weeks, Daniel learned that Eleanor's clarity came and went like weather. Some days she knew exactly who he was. Other days she thought he was someone named Thomas, or her son, or a kind stranger she'd met somewhere she couldn't quite remember. But she always remembered Atlas, always smiled when she saw the dog. "Animals don't forget," she told Daniel once. "They know who's good." The foundation work started slowly. Victoria introduced him to the team, explained the programs. The foundation offered housing assistance, job training, mental health support, and service dog placement for veterans in need. "This is what you did for me," Daniel realized. "What you're doing for me. You're doing it for hundreds of others." "Thousands," Victoria corrected. "And now you'll help us do it for even more." Daniel threw himself into the work with everything he had. He understood these veterans because he'd been them, still was them, in ways that mattered. He knew what it felt like to slip through the cracks, to be looked past, to lose yourself in the space between who you were and who you'd become. He could help. Maybe that's all any of this had been leading to, using his darkest experiences to light the way for others walking the same path. 3 months after that night at Oakmont Station, Daniel stood in front of a group of newly transitioning veterans, Atlas at his side, and told them his story. Told them about the train station, about giving away his jacket, about almost dying from cold and pneumonia. "I thought I had nothing," Daniel said. "But it turned out I had everything that mattered. And when I gave it away, I got more back than I'd lost, not because I deserved it, but because I chose to be who I wanted to be even when it cost me everything." The veterans listened. Some of them cried, all of them understood. This was what kindness could do, not just for the person receiving it, but for everyone it touched after. Spring came to Oakmont with the kind of warmth that felt like a promise being kept. Daniel had been living in the guest house for 5 months, working at the foundation for 4, and slowly learning how to be a person who slept inside and ate regular meals. The nightmares still came. The anxiety still crept up his spine in crowded places. But Atlas was there, and so was the medication a VA psychiatrist had prescribed, and so was the therapy he attended twice a week. He was healing, slowly, but really. Victoria made him a full-time employee in March, with a salary that felt absurd compared to what he'd been surviving on. Daniel immediately started saving half of it, terrified that this could all disappear, needing to know he had a cushion if everything fell apart again. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Victoria told him gently when she noticed. "This is real. You're safe." "I know," Daniel said. But knowing it and believing it were different things. He threw himself into the foundation work, helped redesign their housing assistance program based on his own experiences, started a peer support group for veterans struggling with homelessness, volunteered at the shelter where he'd stayed, now on the other side of the counter. Joe Martinez from the diner showed up at one of the foundation events, did a double take when he saw Daniel. "Man, you clean up nice," Joe said, grinning. Daniel hugged him. "I wouldn't be here without you. Those meals you gave me, they kept me alive." Joe shrugged, uncomfortable. It was just food that would have gotten tossed anyway. "It was more than that," Daniel insisted. "It was seeing me, treating me like I mattered. That's what kept me going." They became friends, real friends. Joe would come by the guest house sometimes, bring dinner, play with Atlas, small connections rebuilding the social fabric homelessness had torn apart. Eleanor's condition worsened gradually through spring, more confused days than clear ones. But she still recognized Atlas every time, would light up when the dog came to visit. "That's my good boy," she'd say, even when she couldn't remember Daniel's name. On one of her clear days in April, Eleanor called Daniel to the main house. Victoria was there too, along with their lawyer. "I want to do something," Eleanor said without preamble. "Something bigger than the foundation." She laid out her vision, a program specifically for homeless veterans, providing immediate housing, comprehensive support, and pathways to permanent stability. Not just a night or two in a shelter, but real intervention that changed trajectories. "How many veterans are there like you?" Eleanor asked Daniel. "Living rough, slipping through the cracks?" "Too many," Daniel said quietly. "Hundreds in this city alone. Thousands nationally. Then we need to do more." Eleanor looked at Victoria. "I want to fund this. $5 million to start. Daniel, I want you to run it." Daniel's coffee cup rattled against his saucer. "Me? I don't have the experience." "You have exactly the experience we need," Victoria said. "You've lived it. You know what works and what doesn't. You know what these veterans need because you needed it yourself." "I don't know if I can." "You can," Eleanor said firmly, her eyes clear and certain. "Because you already have. Every day at the foundation you do this work. We're just giving you more resources to do it bigger." That night, Daniel walked the estate grounds with Atlas, trying to process what had been offered. Program director, $5 million budget, the chance to help hundreds, maybe thousands of veterans avoid what he'd been through. It terrified him, and it felt exactly right. He called Sarah. "That's amazing," she breathed. "Daniel, that's incredible." "I'm scared I'll screw it up," he admitted. "You won't. But even if you make mistakes, you'll fix them. That's who you are. You show up. You do the hard thing. You help people even when it costs you." Daniel looked up at the stars, remembering counting them from a loading dock while trying not to freeze to death. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it." The Whitmore Veterans Housing Initiative launched on a clear June morning, 6 months and 3 weeks after Daniel Mitchell had given his jacket to a confused woman at a train station. The program offered immediate placement in furnished apartments, 3 months of comprehensive support, job training, mental health services, and service dog placement for those who qualified. It was everything Daniel had needed and hadn't had, all in one coordinated package. The first veteran they housed was a woman named Rachel Thompson, Army combat medic, 3 tours in Iraq, living in her car for 8 months after her PTSD made holding down work impossible. Daniel met her at the door of her new apartment, Atlas beside him. He saw himself in her eyes, the suspicion, the fear that this couldn't be real, the bone-deep exhaustion of surviving instead of living. "It's okay," he told her. "You're safe now, and we're going to help you stay that way." Rachel broke down crying in the doorway. Daniel understood. Sometimes safety hurt more than danger because you'd forgotten what it felt like. By September, they'd housed 23 veterans. By December, 47. Each one got the same comprehensive support, the same dignity, the same message. You matter. Your service matters. We're not going to let you fall through the cracks. Daniel worked 16-hour days and loved every minute of it. He hired other veterans to staff the program, people who understood because they'd lived it. He partnered with the shelter where he'd stayed, with Joe's Diner, with every organization that had helped him survive. Eleanor's dementia progressed to the point where she needed full-time care. But on her good days, Victoria would bring her to the foundation offices. She'd smile at the photos on the walls, veterans in their new homes, veterans at their new jobs, veterans rebuilding lives they'd thought were beyond repair. "This is good work," Eleanor would say, even when she couldn't remember exactly what it was. One cold evening in November, exactly 1 year after the night at the train station, Daniel found himself back at Oakmont Station. The foundation was hosting an event there, bringing awareness to veteran homelessness, raising funds for expansion. He stood on the platform where he'd sat a year ago, counting his last $37, trying to figure out how to survive another night. The janitor who'd ignored the confused woman was still there, still pushing his cart, still looking away from anything that made him uncomfortable. But now Daniel stood with reporters and donors and city officials, telling his story, raising $250,000 in a single night. A young veteran approached him after the event. Marine Corps recently separated, staying at a shelter downtown, scared of what came next. "I saw you speak," the veteran said. "Made me think maybe I could, I don't know, do something, be something." Daniel put his hand on the man's shoulder. "You already are something. You served your country. You survived. That's not nothing. And we're going to help you do more than survive. We're going to help you live." He gave the veteran his card for the housing initiative, watched hope spark in exhausted eyes. Atlas pressed against his leg, the dog's warmth familiar and grounding. Later, Victoria found him standing alone on the platform, looking at the bench where he'd sat with Eleanor. "Thinking about that night?" she asked. "Every day," Daniel admitted. "If I'd made a different choice, kept my jacket, walked away. But you didn't. You chose to help, and look what that choice became." Daniel looked at the banner hanging in the station. Whitmore Veterans Housing Initiative, because no one should face the cold alone. "I just gave her my jacket," he said quietly. "That's all. One jacket on one cold night." "And that one jacket changed everything," Victoria said. "For my mother, for you, for every veteran we've helped this year and every one we'll help next year." She showed him the numbers. They'd already raised enough to expand to 3 more cities, to house 100 more veterans, to keep growing until no veteran had to sleep on loading docks or count their last few dollars or choose between warmth and survival. "One act of kindness," Victoria said. "That's all it takes to start something that never ends." Daniel thought about all the people who'd helped him. Joe with his meals, the nurse who'd let Atlas stay, the outreach worker who'd called Victoria, Sarah who'd answered his call, Eleanor who'd seen worth in a homeless veteran. Kindness had rippled outward from that train station like circles in water, touching more lives than he could count. "I was so scared that night," Daniel remembered. "So cold. I thought giving away that jacket might kill me." "But it saved you instead," Victoria said. "It saved all of us." Atlas barked softly, ready to go home, to the warm guest house, to safety, to the life they'd built together. Daniel took one last look at the station, at the bench where everything had changed, at the place where he'd chosen who he wanted to be even when it cost everything. Then he turned toward the future, toward the work that mattered, toward the hundreds of veterans who needed someone to choose them the way Eleanor and Victoria had chosen him. "Let's go home, boy," he said to Atlas. And they walked into the November evening, warm and fed and safe, carrying kindness forward to everyone still waiting in the cold. One act of compassion on a cold night became a movement that's now changing thousands of lives. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that kindness always finds its way home. And never underestimate the power of choosing to help. Even when it costs you everything, it might be the thing that saves you both.